quick Q&A today. Subaru Crosstrek NE XV in Australia versus MGHS. And the mission is Operation Tow the Tinny to the boat ramp and drag it back out. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au and I get new cars cheap. Australia only. Website. Card. Now, I got this question from a dude named Rod. And he's torn. He's torn, I tell you, between buying the proven product and the new upstart. New upstart goes better. Proven product, well, you know what you're getting into. I'm going to lay out which one I would do to drag one's tinny out of a slippery boat ramp in just a sec. This report is sponsored by NordVPN. The internet is so useful, of course, but also a bit risky. You use it every day, so you've got to protect yourself from cyber criminals, scammers, and hackers. NordVPN is a great way to do that. It's simple and effective. You just subscribe, you download the app, and you connect. One click later, you are better protected. Your IP address is shielded from scammers and your online traffic is masked with state-of-the-art encryption across as many as 6 devices. That's especially useful if you don't want anyone else, including your ISP, your employer, or even the government, looking over your shoulder while you're online. You don't want your employer watching you applying for a job at a competitor, for example. That could get awkward. Go to nordvpn.com/AEJC right now and you'll get a huge discount plus up to 4 additional months free and a 30-day money-back guarantee. That's nordvpn.com/AEJC. I'll put a link in the description. NordVPN is the fastest VPN on earth and it costs only about as much as a cup of coffee every month to keep your data, your identity and your devices secure. Because your location is masked, you'll be able to access streaming and other services that might be geo-blocked where you live, plus you can continue to watch your favourite content when you travel overseas. All up, it's a pretty small price to pay for enhanced cybersecurity and greater access to this and that online. Go to nordvpn.com/AEJC now to get more secure and enjoy a juicy discount plus those extra months of free subscription time. It's totally risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. That's nordvpn.com/AEJC, link in the description, and thanks to Nord for sponsoring this episode. Today's correspondent, name Rod. Oh, John, love your segments on YouTube. Well, thanks, Rod. I'm 76 years old, nothing wrong with that, and looking to buy either a MGHS all-wheel drive Essence or Excite, depending on budget, or a Subaru Crosstrek R. I just wanted to make him sound like a pirate. I want an all-wheel drive because I have a small tinny and boat ramps can become slippery. And if you can't get the boat back on the trailer, how can you be a pest in traffic all the way home? I get it. I would like your opinion on A, is a MG okay, or am I better off going for the better-known Subaru? I only do about 8 to 10,000 Ks per year. Look forward to getting your advice. Many thanks, Rod. Well, that's very polite, Rod, and almost literate. Well done. Certainly above average, Australia. There's a fundamental distinction, as I see it. Okay, and it's a little bit of a dichotomy because one vehicle's going to go better and one vehicle's got a superior drive system. So you've got to choose, right? The MG has on-demand all-wheel drive. And what that means is it's got a computer that senses wheel slip, front wheel slip, and then it engages rear wheel drive. Depending on how well that works, that vehicle could be shit hot on a slippery boat ramp or a disaster. And if you're choosing a vehicle, just general comment, okay? You're choosing a vehicle with on-demand all-wheel drive and you want to use it in a slippery environment, like it could be the boat ramp scenario, or it could just be your weekender in the country has a sort of clay driveway and if it's pissing down with rain, it's really slippery. Or you might need to use it might be a patch of sand that you need to get across regularly somehow to get onto the beach, whatever. And typically with beach driving, for example, there's like I don't know, a short distance of soft sand, and then you can get onto the hard pack in between high and low tide, at low tide, for example, and just motor along fine, right? And so it's that soft sand that's a real challenge. The real bastard about on-demand all-wheel drive in these situations is that the computer senses wheel slip, engages all four wheels, and they're driving just fine. And then when that drive is going along just fine, the computer goes, oh, no, everything's working okay now. I don't need all-wheel drive. So it drops out the rear-wheel drive, and then the front end starts digging a hole for itself again, repeat. And this is very frustrating if you've got 100 metres or so of really slippery stuff to traverse. Or, even if you've only got 50 metres or 25 metres or something of slippery boat ramp to get up, right? So if you're going to buy an on-demand all-wheel drive system with that kind of motoring in mind, I'd suggest it's really important to double-check and get it confirmed and sit in the car and see it, that there is a button that you can press that locks the vehicle into 4x4, right? Because having driven some vehicles without that functionality in exactly those kinds of conditions, it's a flat-out disaster, okay? So that's just a general comment about choosing an SUV for slippery driving. If it's got all-wheel drive, you have to be able to lock it. If you're just mum driving the kids to school, yeah, okay. And if you need it for rainy roads, or in Europe or something you need to drive on icy roads, then just the default on-demand all-wheel drive is going to be fine. But if it's that slippery kind of stuff where you're either battling gravity or you're on sand, which is like putting a couple of dirty big wheel chocks against the front wheels every time the rear-wheel drive drops out, then that kind of feedback mechanism can really bring you undone in a big way and be very frustrating, lead to a lot of premature wear and tear on the clutch pack that engages the four-wheel drive, etc. Okay, so the other thing to bear in mind about the MG versus the Subaru, here's how the rest of this plays out. 7 years warranty for the MG, 5 years warranty for the Subaru. I've only had one major consumer complaint that was legitimate referred to me by an MG owner. And when I contacted MG, I know a senior executive there, when I contacted him, he got on it, right? He legitimately got on it and did everything he could, and they did everything they could. And it wasn't just because it was the Antichrist on the phone. I think they roll that way. So I think MG is going to shape up like they're pretty good at customer care in Australia, which is a salient differentiator among car makers here. And Subaru has an established track record of being pretty good with customers as well. So 7 years warranty for the MG, 5 for Subaru, but both seemingly pretty good at customer support. Although, excuse me, Subaru has more of a track record by virtue of it being a major brand in the country for a longer period of time. MG's got critical mass. It's a top 10 car maker in Australia, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Got some exciting product in the wings, like the MG4 electric car. They're going to be a major player here. There is absolutely no doubt about that. Now, the rest of the drivetrain. It's a CVT for the Subaru, and they tend to drone on a little bit, but they are quite fuel efficient. Things aren't much better with the MG because it's got a 6-speed dual-clutch transmission, and the reason for both of these transmissions, incidentally, the CVT and the dual clutch, is fuel efficiency. They're not as nice to drive as conventional automatic transmissions, like epicyclic automatics with clutch with a torque converter at the front. Like, they're better to drive, but they're just not as fuel efficient because the torque converter consumes a lot of energy, and that results in a fuel consumption penalty. So both of these choices of transmission are expedient by the car maker, predicated on fuel efficiency, not driving enjoyment. So there's that to consider. It's easier to abuse a dual clutch transmission because a dual clutch transmission is not unlike a manual in that it actually has a clutch pack, although it's automated, but the clutch pack is similar in nature to a manual transmission. And when you're taking off in a manual, you're in first gear, you might be doing a hill start. If you take forever to get the clutch engaged, you're riding the clutch, right? You're creating a lot of heat and a lot of slip in between the plates, and you will absolutely wear the clutch out prematurely. exactly the same thing happens in a dual clutch transmission if you're inching under load uphill slowly, below the speed at which first gear will engage properly. Okay? So don't do that. In bumper-to-bumper traffic, for example, uphill, just wait for the traffic to move a little bit in front, take off positively. You don't have to drag race. Just take off like normally positively as you would hill starting in a manual. And then if the traffic is sort of stop and go, just stop and then wait for it to move again and go positively again. But don't inch up like you can in an epicyclic automatic, right? Because that will lead to premature wear and tear. CVTs, not so much. You can inch up in them, okay? They rely all the time on shear in between the fairly special oil and the drive belts and cones to get the drive transmitted, so it's harder to abuse a CVT. One of the huge salient differences between the MGHS and the Crosstrek, although they both have 2-litre engines, is that the MG is turbocharged and it makes substantially more power and torque. Like, for the MG, it's 168 kilowatts at about 5,300 RPM. For the Subaru, it's only 110 at 6,000. Now, the turbocharger basically means that the power, maximum power, occurs lower in the rev range, so it's more accessible, and there's more of it in any case because you're jamming more air into the same displacement engine, and that means you can feed it more fuel. It means you can get more torque out of each combustion stroke. Therefore, at wide open throttle and those revs against a balancing load, you can make that greater maximum power. You can also make much more mid-range power, which is really what the peak torque figure tells you about. In the case of the MG, the peak torque is 360 Newton meters at 4,000 RPM versus 196 for the Subaru at the same revs. So essentially, it's almost 400 versus almost 200. You're nearly getting double the mid-range power out of the MG, and that's going to feel substantially different on the freeway, overtaking and things of that nature. The peak torque figure generally tells you more about how zippy the car's going to feel for overtaking, because in practice it's very difficult to exploit the peak power figure because it only exists high up in the rev range, wide open throttle, against a balancing load. It's very hard to drive like that, except if you're parked on a dynamometer, right? And even if you can achieve it, it's only fleeting. Whereas when you look at the peak torque figure, that tells you a lot more about how the car's going to feel in the real world when you're up it for the rent. So I'd suggest that the MG is going to feel a lot faster. It's going to have better powertrain performance on the freeway. That'll play out climbing a hill with the tinny behind the boat, or just when you're not towing, when you're overtaking a truck or something of that nature. So that's something to consider as well, as is the tow capacity. The MG has a maximum tow capacity of 1,500 kilograms. That's braked. And they don't state a tow ball download, so I assume it's something like 150 kilos, but you want to check that before you buy the car, because if it's one of these tow capacities that's limited by, for example, the tyres, you might find that it's only 100 kilos. And that's this is the case with Sportage, actually, like the diesel Sportage, for example, from memory, and correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but it's got a 1.9 tonne tow capacity, but the tow ball download, maximum tow ball download, is 100 kilos. So in practice, it's very difficult to tow 1.9 tonnes because trailers of that nature tend to exert some more like 180, 190 kilos of downforce on the tow ball. And, you know, you're overloaded if you do that. So one of the things that I haven't been able to get to the bottom of in this time is what's the download limit for the MG, if there is one. Definitely ask for that in writing from the dealership, because I couldn't find it on the spec sheet, right? So it's 1,500 kilos for the MG, 1,270 for the Subaru Crosstrek, okay? But at least it has a stated tow ball download limit of 127 kilos, not to exceed 127. So it's 10% of the maximum tow capacity. In the case of an unbraked trailer, you're limited to 650 kilos with the Subaru, so that could be something that catches you out if you've just got the 750 default in your head, because by legislation, trailers more than 750 kilos need brakes. okay? But the Subaru will not tow more than 650 kilos of trailer without brakes and a maximum of 1,270. So I can't give you a distinct winner there, Rod, but I'd suggest if you're only doing 8 to 10,000 Ks a year, the fuel consumption really doesn't matter because you're not buying that much of it. And there is a substantial fuel economy benefit in the official claimed fuel tests for the Subaru, right? It's like 6.5 litres per 100, okay? Whereas for the MG, it's 9.5. There's a lot of numbers down here, sorry about that. So 9.5, but if you're only driving 10,000 Ks a year, then you're really only talking about over a year buying something like 300 more litres of fuel, I think. So in that case, you know, it's really not worth making the decision based on fuel consumption. There'd be, do you really want the symmetrical all-wheel drive, or do you really want the superior powertrain performance? Because I'm pretty sure both will do the job, but you just have to decide which of those two functions is more important to you and then just decide accordingly. But they're both fundamentally decent choices, mate.